This podcast is brought to you by Infinite Resources, a local staffing agency connecting diverse job candidates in central Iowa companies.
Amplified.
Welcome back to Black and Privileged in America podcast, power, love, and money conversations relevant to Black people and for Black thriving. I'm your host, Abena Sankofa. Today, we're joined by two incredible guests from Just Voices, an organization dedicated to amplifying marginalized voices and driving social change. They've recently released part one of their groundbreaking report entitled The People's History, a study of the summer of 2020 protests in Des Moines, Iowa. Join us as we unpack the findings and implications of this report, shedding light on the experiences and voices that are often overlooked. But first, catch Black and Privileged in America podcast everywhere you listen to podcasts, on the Amplified DSM YouTube channel, amplifydsm.com, and on all social media platforms. Today, I am welcoming Harvey Harrison and Lori Young. Harvey Harrison is a graduate of the University of Iowa Law School, a retired attorney and concerned citizen who in 2012 began working to address racial profiling, a leading issue for Black people in Des Moines, Iowa. Lori Young is a graduate of Grandview University, a writer, and a corporate marketing communications executive with 15 years of experience in social justice activism. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yay, I'm so glad that y'all are here.
Good to be here.
We've been in community for some time, Lori, you and I.
Yes.
And Harvey, I had the pleasure of meeting you a few weeks ago at one of the community conversations around this report. But before we get to the report, can you both tell us a lot about Just Voices? What is Just Voices?
Sure. Lori, go.
Well, it sounds like a good question for me. I'm the communications director. Just Voices was established by Harvey, and I helped a little bit along the way in 2019. We became a 501c3 in 2021, but we spent a lot of hours writing our mission and vision. So our mission is to build a platform that educates, collaborates, and advocates to end racially biased policing in Des Moines and across Iowa. And our vision is far-reaching. We want to see a society free from racial oppression. So we go about our work in methodical and quantitative and qualitative ways. We, first of all, collect stories. We have interviewed several victims of unjust policing here in Des Moines. We want to amplify their voices and let them tell what happened to them. Not only what happened to them at the hands of police, but how did it impact their lives? What trauma did they experience? Some of them have gone on to sue the city of Des Moines and the Des Moines Police Department and won. So we collect the stories. We put those stories on our website. But beyond that, we also collect a lot of data. We have policing data on Des Moines Police dating back to 2016 through 2022. We're about to update the website for 2023. So we look at data like how many arrests, bookings, traffic stops, and we break it down by racial categories. So we know based on our analysis that if you're Black in Des Moines, you're 3 times more likely to be stopped by a police officer than if you're a white driver.
Okay, and this is for similar infractions or whatnot?
Just any kind of traffic stop.
Any
period.
kind, okay.
But then I'm glad you asked that because we do break it down on our website, the different infractions. So speeding. In Des Moines, you're 2 times, a little bit over 2 times more likely to be stopped for speeding if you're Black versus white. Now, speeding seems like something that should be race neutral. You know, we all speed sometimes.
I know, I'm guilty.
Yeah, I got a couple on my record.
Yeah.
So then we break it down by one of the common charges is interference with official acts. We break down that, arrests for those, stops for those. We also break it down by, help me out, Harvey, interference with official acts, speeding.
Mechanical violations.
Like a tail light or something along those lines. Okay.
Yeah. So all that data is out there on our website, and you can see the racial disparity in Des Moines. We haven't branched out to any other cities. We it's a full plate just analyzing Des Moines.
I bet.
But someday we'd like to help other organizations, kind of like ours in other cities of Iowa, kind of follow our model, and we would help them figure out how to collect that data and analyze it as well. But we're just focused on Des Moines right now. So we collect the data, and we do a lot of public speaking to universities, civic organizations, colleges, all over. Anybody that will listen to us, we want to raise the public's awareness that this is really happening. It's an issue. The racial disparity in policing in Des Moines is a real thing, and it's an issue that needs to be solved.
What kind of public reception are you getting? Because I know you said you do a lot of speaking at, it sounds like, places where there is an audience for this conversation. So what is the public telling you?
You know, and most of our speaking engagements, they request us. So they've already got an interest. They want to learn more. A lot of people are surprised. When you see the data, and I really, really like data, it tells a clear picture, paints a clear picture. But then when you hear the stories from the people and you give people a three-dimensional look, it's not just a statistic on a page. We talk a lot about the history of American slavery, the slave patrols that started out. That was the beginnings of police departments. We talk about that. So we educate as we go. So most audiences are very surprised, and some want to figure out how they can get engaged. They're like, what can I do? How can I help fix this? So we recruited some volunteers through our speaking engagements. But most of all, we just want them to do something. You know, get involved with civic government, local politics, talk to your city councilman, the mayor, and start questioning them. And we're a 501c3, so we can't get engaged in politics or elections or campaigns. But what we can do,
you mean as far as endorsing a candidate?
Right.
Or okay.
Yeah, we can't really endorse a candidate, but we can encourage people to vote, and we can raise the issue of racially biased policing to candidates and make it force them into a platform conversation about their position. So those are some of the ways we can kind of have some influence, but but stay within the guidelines of 501c3. But we've gotten good reception from our audiences. Yep.
That's good.
Can I
yeah,
take a step
please.
back in terms of the context for the Just Voices project? We're part of a larger project that's been going on basically since 2014, when CCI put together a small group of people, and we did some discernment about how to approach what we knew to be the case, because at that time we had very easy data to look at. Imprisonment in Iowa, if you're black in Iowa, you're something like 7 to 9 times more likely to end up in prison for similar offenses than if you're white. If you are a marijuana user, which is similar across all racial categories, the ACLU came out with a study, said you're 8 times more likely to be arrested for personal use of marijuana in Iowa if you're black than if you're white. We had similar kinds of data. So the question that group looked at, and we studied the Obama administration report from 2015 on 21st century policing practices. So out of that came a whole series of projects about how do you make systemic changes on what is clearly racially biased policing. And Just Voices grew out of that work. So we've spent about 3 to 4 years after that, primarily with CCI.
CCI being?
Iowa Citizens for Community Improvement.
Okay.
Trying to address that with the police with sit-downs. We offered to sit down and talk about it, to kind of come to some common conclusions. It got absolutely blocked. The city officials, the police department, the city manager had zero interest in having that dialogue in any serious way. By 2018, what was clear was that there was no real comprehensive data collection practices in it. So that was one of the primary goals that we set out to do as kind of an offshoot to the overall racial profiling project. And then, as Lori said, we did the same thing after 2020 when George Floyd got murdered and you had the protests come after that. The Des Moines Police Department, the city manager, the city staff had zero interest in doing what was called an after-action review.
Right. I have questions about that. So I want to hit pause a little bit.
we are a part of a larger project
Sure thing.
to actually make systemic changes, and it's been real eye-opening to do the work.
I am fascinated by the report. I mean, I was at, again, the community conversation that was held, one of them that was held in Des Moines, and being a person who has been a part of some of the protests. I was very active in 2020 in the protests for a minute. Then my knees said, honey, you are not as young as you used to be. Sit down. So I did that. I did sit down. But I was just taken aback by the visuals. You all have pictures of the protests, the police in formation, smoke and gas and people's injuries. All of that stuff was really, really eye-opening for me, too. George Floyd's murder was not, of course, we know, was not the first state-sanctioned murder of an unarmed black man in the United States. Right. Not at all. Yep. What was it, do you think, about that particular moment that caused such a public outcry?
Wow, I remember, it's going to be that kind of moment, like people will reflect, where were you when you found out about George Floyd's murder or saw the video? Much like I can tell you where I was on 9/11, A cousin of mine that lives in Cedar Rapids sent me a link through Facebook of the video. I think it was the very next day or maybe 2 days after he'd been killed. I couldn't finish it. Mm-hmm. I got to maybe 7.5 minutes, and I did not want to see him die. I didn't want to get to the end and just witness that. It was horrific, violent, evil thing I'd ever seen. It was like Derek Chauvin and his co-officers were just possessed by something, because they would not spare that man, would not spare George Floyd. I think it was the fact, like you said, we've seen it, we've heard about police-sanctioned murders, state-sanctioned murders by police of unarmed black men, but we've not witnessed it so graphically. And it's like it was a movie. You were watching a movie, but it was real. It was real life. So I think America and the world just said, enough. If this doesn't get changed, I don't know what will. And this cannot ever happen again. But, of course, we know it has happened again and since. Maybe not on video to that degree, but it's still happening.
I'd add to that. I think the fact that people had been locked up with COVID at that point had something to do with it. People were ready to get out, first of all, just to get out of the house in some instances. But I'm with Lori. I think, in my memory, that's the first time where you had the visual image of it right there in front of you. You couldn't escape it. And Lori's not the only person I've heard describe. Not only couldn't I watch it during that time, I have never watched it since. I think that's unusual. I think the horror of it in a way that we've never really experienced. You can get the news broadcast that somebody's been shot. You can even watch clipped videos of some of that over time. But there was just something about that made it worse. And some combination of all of that just exploded.
I remember getting the video on Facebook as well. And like the two of you, I could not watch it until a few days later when our protests here in Des Moines started, and I really felt this urge to participate. It was like coming from the inside, right? And this urge to participate. And at that point, I said, okay, let me sit down and watch this video. And I made myself watch the video, and I was horrified, just like everybody was. Could not believe it. And that was just all I needed, to go out in the street with my sign and my kids and my husband and, participate in some way, take action. According to your report, 208 people were charged with 281 offenses in Des Moines after that weekend of protests. And then your report says that of those who went to trial, most were either dismissed or found not guilty by judge or jury. What does that data point reveal to you about the policing in the city of Des Moines?
I can start with that one. The the thing that was clear in the materials on the criminal charges was that first weekend and then sometime after that, including June 22nd, because that data on that goes through that period of time, the police simply weren't prepared. We have video where you can see the people who have been arrested. They're in front of an officer who is trying to book them in and process them through. And this whole process led to the fact that the officers who were actually making the arrests weren't the ones that actually signed, in many instances, the booking documents. So by the time all of this gets to the county attorney's office, we have emails where the county attorney is basically saying, we need additional information on the paperwork, and the city can't provide it. So it's just, one of it was the simple disorganization. Second thing that was pretty clear was the police apparently were trying to couch all of this in terms of riot or things like that, and the judges weren't having any of it.
The judges wanted specificity.
Well, the judges just simply said the things that went on don't meet the definition of a riot, period. This is a protest. And there were things going on that were illegal, but they were low-level, for the most part, violations. They weren't major violations, and a riot would have been a felony violation carried out. So the judges basically were just, in some ways, not some ways, they were clearly telling the police, you are trying to overcharge these people. And so they dismissed those charges out of hand. And then some of them, there's a whole pile of them that where you get the original record of the arrest, and then suddenly there's nothing. You have even sometimes don't even have the booking record. And that has to be a matter of expungement. But when we went, meaning somebody had to decide we're not going to move forward with that and eliminate it. But there's no record of it. We went to the county attorney's office and asked, and they don't have the records of what was expunged and what's not. You've simply got a record of this person was arrested and charged, and then it disappears completely.
That's incredible.
That's what I thought, too.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
So between that combination of all of those different factors, the anecdotal piece that we were told, and we don't have any hard evidence about it, was that the police were told, take back the streets. And so we have audio of a cop beating with his little stick, saying, I finally get to use this.
Those were the officer's words?
Literally.
I finally get to use this.
Yes. So we've got stuff like that. And so if I circle back, lack of preparation, we simply weren't ready. The overuse of wrong charges that they shouldn't have been using, and then clearly mass arrests. They were just simply hurting everybody they could catch.
So when you say, and that's one of my questions I have written down here, is defining what a mass arrest is, because as I'm reading the report, and I'll hold this up for you all, because hopefully you will go to the website, justvoicesia.org, and read this report. Mass arrest, that is literally arresting a large group of people under one incident number or case number. Is that right?
Yes.
Wow. Okay. So how does mass arrests, the bad record keeping, all of that violate the Center for Policy Equity's recommendations for crowd management that you mentioned in the report? And I also want to kind of connect that to what you mentioned earlier, Harvey, about the after-action review. So rather than conducting a comprehensive and transparent after-action review, you all stated, that is a practice recommended by national and international law enforcement agencies. The Des Moines Police Department instead completed after-action activities, apparently, which resulted in an update of their crowd management general order and the crowd dispersal guide and recommendations, but that's different than an after-action review. Can you help us understand that?
Probably should start.
Because that was a lot, I know.
Probably should start. Yeah, you got multiple questions.
I know.
It's going for a long time just going on that.
I'm trying to chug them in because this is a good report, good solid work, and we have only a little time.
Sure.
Yeah.
The piece on the mass arrests and the Center for Policing Equity recommendations simply come down to there are a standard set of best practices on a national level. If you have a large protest, which is what this was, these were people out exercising their First Amendment rights to protest government activities, and in this instance, 400 years of racial injustice. So there are ways that are recommended that you should do some things, and what the police department did was ignored those. And that includes, you don't do mass arrests. You don't just do a sweep of everybody that's in a protest and say these are people are all guilty of rioting. That's just wrong. Or interference with official acts. They couldn't even prove that with it. So that's a quick answer of what you see in the magazine when you see the 5 areas of recommendation we took from the policing equity. You want to talk about, either pick that up a little bit or talk about the question of the after action review, either one of those?
Yeah, I will just, pretty much echo what Harvey said. An after action review, there are models on how it should be done. And many large cities, and some not so large cities across America did an after action review, a formal, detailed self-examination of how the police conducted themselves.
After 2020.
After the 2020 protests. And most of those cities got those done by the end of 2020 or in early 2021. Seattle, Dallas, Chicago. But even Iowa City did an after-action review of their police department's performance during their 2020 protests. So it's something that a progressive and a thoughtful police department would want to do, because if Des Moines police would look back on how they performed and all those charges getting dropped and all those people being acquitted that did go to trial, they'd have to ask themselves, we did some things wrong. And there's got to be some lessons learned. That's the point of an after-action review, is learning lessons so that you don't repeat mistakes in the future. And so in our work at Just Voices, we do refer to a lot of national research, like the Center for Policing Equity, DOJ website, all kinds of different. There's a lot of activist organizations like us across the country. We check out what our best practices. And so we didn't see our Des Moines Police Department follow that, and then not being willing to study their behavior with an after-action review was kind of appalling. So as we so often do at Just Voices, we simply start asking for data, and that's what we did.
And I want to pick up with that piece on the after-action review. Well, I do. I want one thing first. You talked about the pictures.
Yes.
And I want Lori to go back and spend a minute talking about the pictures.
The pictures were so compelling.
Aren't they great?
I mean, it almost looks like, as you stated, Lori, earlier about this movie quality of these unfortunate events. It almost seemed as if these were captured from Hollywood almost.
Yeah.
But at the same time, that proves how, dumbed down we are to this violence. And it's sad.
Right.
Desensitized is the word I'm looking for.
Okay. Yeah.
So, yes, please
Yeah.
continue.
Oh, yeah. Well, we were fortunate enough at Just Voices, as we would interview protesters that were at these different protests, some that were harmed. We'd say, did you take any pictures? Can we get some of your pictures? Because we knew we wanted to publish this. A lot of them didn't have pictures, amazingly enough. Some did. But there was a gentleman named Hashim who has his own photography studio here in Des Moines, HKH Photography. And he just made it a point to go out to all these protests and take pictures and pictures and pictures. And one of our volunteers at Just Voices knew Hashim and asked him, can we use your photos in this publication, in this study? He said, no problem. Just give me accreditation, you can have as many as you want.
Wow, that's incredible.
He gave us like 400 photos. 400. It was hard to narrow it down. Yeah, and the variety, the young, like you said, when you went to the protests, you saw young children, you saw elderly, you saw black, you saw white, you saw Latino, differently abled people, everybody. And I just think data is great, stories are great, but images are also history. And so what I'm so proud of in this publication is we have some great imagery, and people need to realize these are Des Moines photos. This isn't from
That's the key.
Some national clearinghouse. We Des Moines Register had some great photos too, but they want like $500 to use
Yeah.
their images. So
Well, one
we
of these
can't afford
pictures,
that.
I'm looking at one right now. I would tell you that I would think this is somewhere not in the state of Iowa if the Merle Hay Mall sign was not in the background.
I know.
If it had not been for that, I'd be like, what country is this?
I know, it just looks like
Really?
a war zone.
Yeah, it looks like Gaza.
Yes, it does. And that's why you'll see when you go through and you see the images, you'll see, landmarks and things you recognize, and you might see
people you
somebody you
recognize.
know. Yeah. A lot of these people probably don't even realize they were being photographed.
Right.
But it just adds a great testimony to what happened that summer, and we're just thankful to Hashim for loaning us these images.
Well, and that's why I wanted to talk about it, because when you look at that, the reaction is just when I looked at it, that was my reaction. This isn't Des Moines.
Yeah.
And it took me a while. I could get my head around the fact that, these were the photographs of what was really going on then. That Merle Hay, for example, the part of the testimony we got out of that was one officer who was dropped off by their vehicle in it, and he just started spraying tear gas. Well, when you're talking about what are violations of what are national standards, that's a clear one.
Yeah.
You're not supposed to use tear gas to break up a protest. It is not an allowable. They did it. So okay. So I wanted to make sure people understood these are photographs of what happened. We also picked up pictures from the booking records. We had some others as well. So when you see the damages to people in the pictures, there are court records and things like that. And we've picked up pictures along the way from many of them. But the bulk of the pictures and virtually everything you see of the people out in the street, those came from Hashim, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
And we're really grateful. After action reviews. The thing that triggered it for me personally was when the city didn't just automatically start to do that kind of review after these protests, once they kind of settled down by the fall, that struck something inside of me. So we, along with other people in the activist group, went and specifically asked the city to do that, and they just flat weren't going to. And so that's when Lori and I started talking about, this is a huge project for a small nonprofit organization to put this together. It's taken us about 2.5 years on it. But that just seemed wrong. I mean, the police department, the city manager, all of the public officials, including the council, in my opinion, should have jumped at the opportunity of taking this event and using it as a tool, as Lori said, to figure out how can we improve policing in Des Moines. And it's not like this came out of the blue. The activist community has been asking that we review the police department and its activities since 2015.
And they've not been interested in that at all. I mean, they may have entertained some conversation, but there's no movement. I mean, why do you think that is? Now we're looking at, we have a new mayor in Des Moines. There is going to be, in the fall, hopefully a new city manager. The current city manager, Scott Sanders, has announced his resignation. And then also Chief Wingert of the police department is retiring. So we're looking at a whole new set of people in positions of power. Do you think that will have any impact on accomplishing some of these milestones that you're looking for regarding like the citizens review, council or board, however it's termed, or moving forward on any of these other actions?
Well, we hope so because, as you said, with Sanders resigning, Wingert retiring as chief, and new mayor, we got a new council person, Mike Simonson. We look at it as a great opportunity to really change some culture and some policies. It's a lot happening at once.
I mean, it's hard to change culture when it's still an all-white city council, too. I mean,
Exactly.
It's an all-white city council, and the city is way more diverse than that.
I'm really disappointed our council looks the way it does. It does not reflect the population of Des Moines and the diversity that we have here. I was with CCI last week, and we had a meeting with the new mayor, Connie Bozen. Excuse me. She was, kind of bemoaning how much change is happening all at once. Now she's got to go out and find a new city manager, obviously. That's a long search. I guess Scott gave basically 6 months notice. But you got a chief you got to find in there as well. And we said, well, this is a great opportunity.
Opportunity,
right,
yes.
to staff those positions with the right people. Mayor Bozen, before she became mayor and was councilwoman at large, we had several meetings with her. She was quite open to listening to our concerns about policing. We have, we just kind of have a wait and see to see how she's going to really change things, or if she's going to champion some police reform. So, we have made some progress in the activist community, and Just Voices is just one part. Harvey mentioned Iowa CCI. There's other organizations like ACLU of Iowa, our local NAACP, Surge Des Moines, which stands for Showing Up for Racial Justice. We've all been working and asking for this for years. So we have forced the city to do some studies where they've hired third-party consultants to study how data is collected by our police. That study was done by Public Works and released in the spring of 2022. They had 23 recommendations of how our police need to change how they collect data.
Well, that's encouraging.
Improve.
22 ways to do something differently.
Yes.
And Harvey laughs.
Because we don't want it to be a study on the shelf.
Yeah.
Now we are applying pressure constantly. How are we coming? Have we set up the data analytical unit in the Des Moines Police Department that this study recommended? So in a way, Just Voices and others in the activist community are conducting the oversight that a civilian review board would do. But since there isn't one, we're doing it. So we're monitoring, we're pressuring, we're at city council meetings more times than we want to be. Then we also pressured the city council to hire a third-party consulting firm called 21st Century Policing Solutions. Mm-hmm. They just released their report and their study of our Des Moines Police Department in November of last year. And they looked at the policy, training, procedures, and culture of the Des Moines Police Department.
Right.
And they had 46 recommendations for changes. So when you had the 23 from Public Works, 46 from 21CP, they got a lot of work to do. The city has spent over $300,000 on those two studies alone. So we're not going to allow them just to let them sit on the shelf. That's a lot of taxpayer money. We will continue to apply pressure to see that they adopt some of these changes. We always get resistance with the council and the manager. Everything moves at a snail's pace.
Okay, so to your point, in your report, I'm just going to read a smidgen of something that you all included. It said in regard to the 21 CP, tracking data and relevant details on the use of force is a recommended best practice for all police departments. 21 CP Solutions states on this page, as I'm reading, 31 of its November 2023 report to the Des Moines City leadership that use of force like search and seizure is an issue of fundamental concern to most residents. Whether it be unlawful arrests or issues that lead to the physical harm or death of residents, force is both a quotidian and fundamental concern. So you all pursued additional information as a result of that, and then the city refused to provide it. So the city is also resisting the lawsuit that you all filed as a result of that. So my question is, can you tell us what you can about the case being sent to the Iowa Supreme Court, and why doesn't or won't the Des Moines Police Department, why don't they share data with the public or even intra-department among themselves?
I'll let Harvey tackle that one because he bought the lawsuit.
Sure. One of the things we've done over these last years is we filed 2 lawsuits against the city on Freedom of Information Act requests. The first one involved the release of videos that they didn't want to release. We won that lawsuit. Gina Messimer's the lawyer that does that work for us. So it changed and made video more accessible for people who want to look at the body camera videos on it. And the second one, the use of force reports, the city does a overall statistical report each year on just the numbers of it. But when asked to provide the underlying document, because a use of force report is supposed to be prepared by every officer at the end of every tour of duty if they've used a use of force. And the numbers didn't quite add up. But then, of course, what we had, the start of all of that was we had the 2020 protests. And it was clear from the materials we were looking at that use of force reports weren't prepared in many instances, weren't prepared timely, if prepared at all, and some just weren't prepared, period. So I wanted to look at, and we wanted to look at to see what was being described from the police department against what the people were reporting was being done to them. And the city said, you can't have them. They're protected under exemptions under the Chapter 22 of the Iowa Code. So our lawyer sued. We won the lawsuit, and the judge basically did a really nice detailed analysis for people who would like to read about it of the arguments on both sides, and said, you're going to release these. Gave them 45 days to do it. And at that point, the city attorney's office apparently decided to appeal that to the Iowa Supreme Court, and that's where it stands right now. One of the things that's a spin-off from my viewpoint is I've basically asked the city council to override that. There is nothing mandatory about appealing it. The city could easily choose to say, these are records the court has said they should be released. We believe they should be released. The people have a right to see these. So far, the city council has shown no interest in doing that.
That's so disappointing. Okay.
It is. And they don't want us to see those individual. They reported, as Harvey said, on a high level, 387 uses of force in 2020. So there should be 387 individual use of force reports. They don't want us to see them because they're probably not there, or they're badly completed, or they're misleading, or just completely dishonest. So they've decided to appeal and force it. So here we are, delayed, and until the Supreme Court, considers this case, we will never see those reports.
Well, and I think some of the people might want to do, you can start with the stories that are in here, a couple of them. It'd be useful because we have links to some of the videos, and if you want to go watch something that should be terrifying to everybody, you go in and look at the Blazing Saddle story in there. You're talking about, this was a day when there was a protest up at the state capitol building, and the police used tear gas and other methods to force the people off of the State House grounds. And as they were coming down the hill, there were some folks sitting outside of the Blazing Saddles bar, and it was after the mayor had told people they couldn't be there, but they were out there to provide help, assistance with water and stuff for people who've been gassed and beaten and stuff. And the police see them, and some person in that police vehicle yells Molotov cocktail. Well, that happened to be a person with a container that had milk or milk of magnesia in it. And so you watch that video, that vehicle pulls up, and out of that car come fully armored police officers with military weapons pointed. That ought to send chills up people's back.
Yeah.
And there ought to be a report about that sitting out there that was prepared at that time by every officer that was engaged in that to see what they said about that. And we want to look at them. And eventually, I hope we will.
I hope you will too. I know we're time is just flying by, but I'm going to try to squeeze in some more questions.
Okay.
Along the lines of that, the militarization of the police department. Sure. I was really taken aback by that narrative that happened at the Blazing Saddle, as well as the narrative by Kerwin Dobbins, an Army and Navy veteran here in Des Moines.
Yep.
He says from local police departments to the U.S. Justice Department, white supremacists are in positions of power and they, quote, need to be rooted out, end quote. We're talking about a militarized police state while ill-prepared, outfitted like troops. So how complex really is the problem of modern policing?
Gosh, it's very complicated. It's rooted in the maintainment of white supremacy, power, and control. You know, people will say the United States prison system is modern day slavery. It's a for-profit system. They want bodies in those prison beds, just like hotels want people to stay at their hotel. That's how the government makes money. It's how the government has crippled the black male primarily, but black women as well, and destroyed families, damaged a person's ability to earn a living once they are released from prison, with all of this maze you have to get through, and nobody wants to hire an ex-felon. It is, I think it was it wasn't Brian Stevenson, it was Ta-Nehisi Coates who said, right, our criminal justice system isn't broken, it's working exactly as it was designed.
Yeah, it's perfect, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And it's very complex, but I still believe in the will of the people and the ability to get change. If women would have never marched, we would have never got the right to vote. You know, I always considered myself a rebel without a cause. I wish I was like 15 to 20 years old in the 60s, because I would have been on them streets. I would have been on them buses going down south. And that's why I think I was so, inspired and motivated to protest that summer of 2020, because I've always been a justice fighter.
Me too.
It's just like, I went to the women's marches on the Capitol here in Des Moines before George Floyd even was murdered. So reforming the criminal system is hard, but we can't always look to the federal government to do it. We've been waiting and waiting and waiting for them, and Biden made a lot of promises when he ran about criminal justice reform that he hasn't delivered on. We believe local change. That's, people got to start paying attention to what's happening locally, where we have the more power to change things and elect the right people to lead us. And so it's complex, but I don't believe it can't be changed. It's just, is there a will?
Yeah, is there a will?
I want to add to it, because
sure,
the Directors Council in Des Moines, which is a group of black leadership in Des Moines, got funded by a major charity and produced 2 reports on the economic conditions in Des Moines. And it's really clear, and has been for years, that policing is not the primary problem in Des Moines. It's simply a reflection of what's going on, that the economic status of the black community and now the brown community in Des Moines is always suppressed. And so you've got, when you talk about complexity of it, it's going to take a long time and maybe generations before you get to people's hearts and actually get the stuff done that needs to be. The key is, we believe this is one place where you could actually make a real impact and a real difference, and do it now. And it's not simple, but if you will reframe policing into terms of public safety and start thinking about what is it that is needed in order to increase the public safety of the community as a whole, that's a good starting point. But you can't do that if your basic underlying premise is that blacks are largely criminals in the first place, and that all of the real function of the Des Moines Police Department is to protect property interests and not people. And if you look at the policing as what it is, as a product of 400 years of racial suppression and the slave committees and all of that, it's going to take time to actually make the changes, but you got to start. And this seems like a place you could start.
It does seem like a place to start. I would encourage our listening audience to please, please, please go to justvoicesiowaia.org and read this report. It's available online, and you will be changed once you immerse yourself in this data.
Can I add, Abena?
Sure, yeah.
When you look at it online at our website, there are live links that you can watch these videos we're talking about. So you're reading along online, click on the link. You can see the videos of what happened at Blazing Saddle. You can see the video of a man just walking down the street in downtown Des Moines, and 7 cops come up and spray him directly in the face with mace. He's just an older gentleman just walking home. So that's another nice benefit.
Yeah.
You can actually see the videos.
So not only can you read it, but you can see it as well. There is a excerpt that I'd like to read in the Pasha Morgan story, and then a follow-up question to that. Pasha Morgan is an activist who was wrongly arrested after one of the protests in 2020. The narrative begins this way. The police charged him with inciting a riot and failure to disperse before they released him 3 days later on a $2,000 bond. Morgan was arrested on a Saturday evening and released on Monday afternoon. He says, "Yeah, they got us all out. Not only that, when we walked out to the parking lot, there were snacks and new clothes if people needed them. There were cigarettes. There was Tylenol if you needed it. There were people offering rides. There were people just to hug you and say it was going to be okay if you didn't have any family that was going to show up for you. It was awesome. Our community is awesome. We take care of our people." So my question to you both is, in your work collecting these stories and videos and images, what did you take away from or think about the people involved in the protest that agreed to speak out? What resonated with you the most or stays with you even now? Although on the flip side of that, there is one person, Logan Vilhauer, in his statement, he says, "I have no faith in America anymore." So we have two really opposite points of view. What are your takeaways about the people involved?
First of all, I'd just like to thank every protester that agreed to talk to us, because this study is all about the 2020 protests, but Just Voices has been interviewing victims of unjust policing for years. And it's always hard to, not always, but many times people are reluctant to tell their story for fear of retribution. They may be suing and they've got to wait till the lawsuit is completed. A lot of them just want to forget about it. They are so traumatized. They don't want to keep talking about it and reliving it. So I thank the protesters like Pasha and Kerwin, Lennon, and others, Zach, that shared their story. My heart breaks for them. Some of them have experienced lasting trauma, like Logan. His whole attitude about America is changed. Zach had to undergo psychiatric counseling and considered suicide, and he shared that openly. It made me proud and it made me ashamed. It made me angry and it made me sad. It provided the inspiration to keep doing this work, because it's hard and it's emotionally taxing for anybody that doesn't give up on this fight. But these people really endured something for what they believed in. And it just left me more determined to fight for them. And I have two black sons, 32 and 38. Thank God they've not had any negative encounters with the police, but I know they're one of the most targeted and endangered species in America. So that's why I do. I do it because it's not right. I'm all about justice, fairness, equity. So I'm just determined to keep on working, but I feel for these people, the protesters, because I'm old. I went to
It's a state of mind, Lori.
Well, I'm elderly. I don't know what to say.
You're seasoned. You're seasoned.
Yes, and I love seasoned fries.
I know that's right.
So, but I couldn't go to all these protests. I went to a couple of them, and it's hard.
It is hard.
It's hot. We're talking the summer, 95 degrees. People were still wearing masks because we were in the middle of COVID, so you was doubly hot. So,
well, I remember one protest in particular. It just is ingrained in my mind because I went to 2 or 3, or 4. Calvetta Berry did the Mothers Against Violence protest, and we walked down University, headed east, across that bridge over the river. And when we got to the bridge, everybody was asked to lay down, face down, for 9 minutes and 46 seconds. I got myself down there on that ground, and all I could do is begin to cry, just thinking about what this man, I was hot. It was uncomfortable. I'm a little fluffy, so I was terribly uncomfortable. But I'm thinking, this is nothing, because I know I'm about to get up and go home. This man didn't get up. He didn't go home.
And he was laying on concrete.
He was laying on concrete.
With somebody like 200
the
plus
full
pounds.
weight of a human being on top of him. And so it just really brought the entire thing to bear. I also would like to extend a thank you to the people who laid their bodies on the line in pursuit of a more just community, better treatment, equality and equity. I mean, it's monumental, and I hate to see our fervor for this fight wane publicly. So I appreciate you all for keeping the conversation, the hope, the optimism alive. You're in pursuit of something magnificent, and I appreciate it. I have two more questions I'm going to toss at you. Number one, we spoke briefly about, well, not briefly, it was intermingled in the whole conversation about the images, the video, freedom of press, our First Amendment right, freedom of speech, your partnership with Dana James with Black Iowa News. She was a guest last season on Black and Privileged in America podcast. And then also the report details the narrative of Andrea Sahori, the only journalist in the country to be arrested during the protest. So how important is the freedom of speech, our First Amendment rights? What are your thoughts on that?
That one's a simple one.
Yeah.
I mean, because it's a guaranteed constitutional right. It's one of the fundamental pillars of our country. And to violate that is just unconscionable. As I said, that's easy for me.
Yeah.
And these protesters were peaceful.
Yeah.
Over 95% of the protests were peaceful. We have got to protect every right in our democracy that are constantly being threatened. And freedom of speech goes both ways. So you can stand up and say some really vile and incorrect stuff, but it's your right to say it. And we see that happening in our political climate right now. A lot of misinformation out of there, but I believe in the right of freedom of speech. And that's what these people were doing that summer.
Exercising that right.
Exercising that right in a peaceful manner.
So looking ahead, what are the next steps for Just Voices in addressing the issues raised in the report and continuing to advocate for Des Moines and beyond?
The immediate thing we're planning right now is on May 25th, which will be the 4th anniversary of George Floyd's murder. We're going to do a workshop at the Franklin Avenue Library, and it'll require registration on it. And we want to, part of that will be to raise up again so that people don't forget, because I think one of the mantras for us will be, we must never forget. And of course, it's easy to forget these things and move on. Mm-hmm. And so we'll spend some time with that, reminding people of what really happened. And then we're going to take a look at what's happened to the promise of change since that time to this date, and then make a call for people for the next step. The other thing we're doing, we've characterized this as Volume 1. The reason we did that is because there are now still pending lawsuits, civil lawsuits filed by some of the protesters. Those, for the most part, have not yet been resolved. They will be coming to trial sometime in the next probably 6 months to a year. In fact, one of them may get to trial yet this month.
And when you say lawsuit, we're talking about state and federal.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so, and there will be judgments then, I think, that'll come out of those, at least that's my anticipation. And once we have a clear picture of what's happened in the litigation, then we'll come back and use that litigation and some of the other stories that we weren't able to get in this first volume, and we'll do a second set on it. So I think two things related to it. The one is the May 25th workshop that we're working on. The planning for that is we've got the space set aside. Lori and I have got a lot of work to do to put that together to make it happen, but we will. And then the second piece is there will be a Volume 2.
And in addition to that, we'll continue doing what Just Voices does, studying the data, advocating to city and sometimes state leadership, and working with others in the activist community to get the changes that we know need to be made and that will just make Des Moines and Iowa a more just place to live.
Well, and there's a very specific thing going to that, which you've alluded to earlier on it, which is the changes that will come in the city attorney's office and the city manager's office. one of the things that 21CP Solutions recommends strongly in multiple places in its study is a better engagement of the community in all that decision-making process on it. City doesn't like to do that, apparently. So CCI, I think, is going to lead the charge on having a seat at the table as the new city manager is picked. We want the community, and we want the activist community. We want the affected, oppressed communities to be at the table so that the voices of these growing minority populations will be heard. And the same thing is going to be true. If there is actually going to be a new chief of police, we want a seat at the table so that we get somebody who at least will be open to the idea of reform and the necessity of reform.
Yeah, community engagement is very important. And when meeting with Mayor Bozen last week, she made it clear that the council hires the next city manager, but the city manager hires the police chief. I don't care who hires who. Community must have a voice.
They must have a voice. The community must have a voice. You heard it from Lori Young and from Harvey Harrison. Thank you both so much.
Thank you
for being
Thank
here.
you for caring.
Oh man, yes, this is my home.
That's right.
I care. And so, as is our tradition here at Black and Privileged in America podcast, we always ask our guests to share a book that you have read or that you are reading that's moved you, challenged you, or changed you. What do you got?
Go ahead.
Well, the one I brought, I've got so many books on oppression and how has it changed.
Me too.
That I thought I would bring something totally different. And it relates, of course, to the fact that we have this wonderful event going on with the sun. It's called 7 Brief Lessons on Physics by a person, Carlo Rovelli. Rovelli is a...
May I see it?
Sure.
Your book? Thank you.
Rovelli is a high-level physicist. He's Italian. And he also is a poet, a journalist, and a commentator. And so these are literally 7 essays on high-level physics written so that the average person can understand them. And I've also read a book by him that I love. It's on my bedstand, actually, which is There Are Places in the World where kindness or where rules are less important than kindness. And I'm moved by this man on a regular basis. I read one of his essays in either this book or the other one probably 2 or 3 times a week.
That's awesome. He sounds like a Carlo Rovelli. Sounds like a brilliant thinker. So that book is definitely on my list. Thank you, Harvey.
Sure.
Lori, what about you?
Well, I haven't finished this book, but I'm working on this book called Our Black Year by Maggie Anderson. I met the author back in 2012.
Ooh,
and she autographed my book, but I can't understand her writing, so I don't know.
Can I try? Let me
Yes.
see if I can decipher what she wrote. For my sister, Lori, this... I don't know what she said, but it's probably really good.
I think
I
it's
got
something nice.
far, but this is yes.
It'll be nice.
Yeah.
Our Black Year. I'm not done reading it, but Maggie and her husband live in Chicago, and they're both got great careers, make plenty of money, live in a nice area, nice neighborhood. But they decided one year, as new parents, well, they had 2 kids, school age. They wanted to buy nothing. They wanted to buy everything they needed to run their family and their life from only Black-owned businesses.
Oh.
And they set out to this challenge. And this whole book documents what they went through trying to buy gas, grocery, clothing. Just think about what you buy in a given week, but it had to be a Black-owned business. And one of the hardest ones was they found a Black-owned gas station miles away from where they lived. So they would go there and buy gas cards, so that business would get but it was like a Shell or some kind of franchise gas station. But they would buy from a Black-owned one, but then use them wherever it was most convenient to where they lived. But it's just all about the importance of supporting Black-owned businesses, the power of Black entrepreneurship, and how they searched for months trying to find a Black-owned grocery store. And the one they found in Chicago, now you would think Chicago has plenty of Black-owned businesses. The one they found was, inconvenient quite a ways, but they were committed. Black-owned dry cleaner, all their their personal services from lawyers to accountants or whoever do their taxes had to be Black-owned. And it's just really interesting and encourages people. Sometimes I have to stop and think. I give, DoorDash a lot of money. And I love certain chains, food, but I do like local restaurants. But sometimes I have to stop and think, I can buy something from a Black-owned business to eat. And you got to stop and be intentional about it, So that's what our Black Year is all about.
I love that. Thank you both for sharing your book recommendations. I have one too. Eyes Off the Prize by Carol Anderson. It's a really hard read, but if you care about the things that we're talking about today, it's worthy. It is worthy if you don't care. So Carol Anderson is a scholar who is a professor at Emory University, and she details how the history of policing and law enforcement have impacted the civil rights movement and beyond. So it's a really great read. That's what I got. And thank you all again for being here. This has been amazing. Thank
My pleasure.
you.
Thank you for having us.
Abena.
Thank you for joining us in this important conversation with Harvey Harrison and Lori Young from Just Voices. Black and Privileged in America podcast appreciates their work as they continue to amplify voices and drive positive social change in our communities. Be sure to check out the report, The People's History, online at www.justvoicesia.org and visit my website at abenasankofa.com. Stay encouraged, stay courageous, stay curious, stay engaged, and keep striving. Thanks for listening. Until next time.